Hey, welcome to X-Oriente, the new voice of Brotherhood. I am your host, Eric Diamond.
I am your other host, Jason Van Dyke.
And who's the other host, or the guest?
That is Adam Tager. Wait. That.
No.
Wait.
No.
I'm going to do
Other
that
way.
again.
Yeah.
That one.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, me. This one.
Hi, Adam. So tell me about where do you hail from?
Yeah, so I am a Mason from the District of Columbia. William R. Singleton Hope Lebanon Lodge, number 7, the Eagle Lodge, number 1893, and Samuel Gompers Benjamin Franklin Lodge, number 45.
Recently.
Recently, as of last year,
Hmm.
as well as a member of the Grand Lodge of DC.
Awesome. And how long have you been a Mason?
So I was raised in 2011 after I graduated from school. I was raised in Singleton Lodge number 7 and then ended up affiliating with the last 2 lodges in the past couple of years.
Cool. And so we wanted to talk today about conspiracy theories. Specifically because there's a lot going on. Just pick up a newspaper and there's a lot of, conspiracies floating around, both real and imagined. And so, fill me in, Jason. Why is Adam joining us for this conversation?
So we were talking about it a little bit, and in the news, we've seen a bunch of stories about kind of the mass shootings, things like that keep happening. And you and I were talking about how long until Masons get caught up in this. Relatively recently, the last couple of years, there were threats in Milwaukee. They arrested a guy who was allegedly preparing to shoot up the Scottish Rite in downtown Milwaukee. And here in D.C., there's a pervasive conspiracy theory online called Pizzagate, which basically says that Hillary Clinton and John Podesta have a child sex trafficking ring that's run out of the bottom of a pizza place. In
the
upper
basement.
Northwest.
The basement of a
No, the
pizza
basement.
place.
Right. Sorry. The
The
basement.
non-existent basement, by the way.
Right,
Which
which it actually doesn't have, and it's physical impossibility. At any rate, some idiot showed up there a couple years ago with an AR-15 and scared the living hell out of everybody there. Popped a couple shots in a wall, demanding to be taken to the basement to see, where the children were being abused. But again, they don't have a basement at all. It does not exist. And they finally arrested the guy. But it keeps happening. And so, like we were talking about, when does it happen to Masonry? When do these conspiracy theories get completely out of hand? And when do they end up really impacting us? Adam works for the federal government in a security type role and has some expertise on this. So we figured we'd bring him in and talk about, physical security. Where are our danger points? What can we do about them? That kind of stuff. And we can talk a little bit about what the Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia is doing too, as a reaction to some of this stuff. But that's it.
So, Adam, tell me a little bit about what do you do for the feds that you can talk about, or
Yeah, so I don't want to overstate my credentials. I am in emergency management as a profession. So while I have a little bit of law enforcement experience, I'm not trying to pass myself off as a physical security or law enforcement expert. That said, I have worked in preparedness for a number of years, both in terms of natural and man-made disasters. Natural, obviously, being the hurricanes, the earthquakes, the tornadoes, but man-made being more and more common active shooter. How can we be thinking about when an active shooter could occur, where an active shooter could occur, what can we do in those circumstances, what can we be looking out for, what should we be preparing for? And so I've worked, I want to state So I work for the federal government. I'm not speaking tonight on behalf of the federal government, just to get the legalese out of the way. But
Good job.
I have done a lot of research and training exercises in terms of what do we need to do? What do we need to be thinking about if
Mm-hmm.
there's an active shooter? And that, as Jason mentioned, is something that we've been starting to think about, at least in the Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia as well. What happens what happens when we go into the lodge room? Are our doors secured? Is there somebody looking out there? What happens when if there's one point of entry and egress? How are we thinking about that? What can we be doing about that? And so we've with some other luminaries in the Grand Lodge, we've been kind of starting to undertake that effort.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, it's funny because historically, there are two things at play here. One, for the most part, Masons, we're a relatively trusting bunch. We don't really have that much that's of any actual value, monetary value.
Oh,
for
come
people
now,
to
the
steal.
treasure in the basement.
Right, that's true. That's true. Just like the pizza place. So, we're lax on our physical security. Our locks are not that complex. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people don't have cameras in their lodges. And instead they've just got old doorknob locks. They're not even deadbolts. And so, like, you know, we're really starting at ground zero for a lot of this stuff. And on top of that, we're in a time where let's be really honest and frank about it. We're dying for membership, and so we want strangers to come. We're trying our damnedest to be open and to say, hey, come look at our fraternity and how cool it is, and so we're trying to do those things, but sometimes it's not always the best play. So.
It's funny. I was out at a community service event with one of my lodges yesterday, and we were giving out snow cones at a street fest. And I was out there, I was talking to people left and right, and there was a bunch of people, oh, I'm interested in masonry, or my grandfather was a mason, or whatever, insert question about masonry here. How do I find out more information? And I said, oh, there's this great resource. Our Grand Lodge has a page where it has every single lodge, the location of the lodge, when they meet. And as I was saying this, I was thinking, wow, if somebody wanted to get to one of us, it is all right there.
Yeah.
Which we need to do as a fraternity in order to keep thriving and getting new members. But that also puts a burden on us to be aware of the information that we're putting out. We had a situation, Jason knows, we had a situation last year and the year before, I think, where we had Grand Lodge events where, because they were on a public website, not necessarily behind a firewall, there were non-Masons who came and tried to come into the events. And frankly, it was fine because they were just honestly made a mistake. They thought they could go to this. They thought it was open. One guy thought he was a Mason when he wasn't. But had any of those men had intentions of doing harm, that could have been a bad situation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I want to back up just a little bit and talk a little bit about conspiracy theories, because Masonry is no stranger to them. I mean, we've been dealing with them almost as long as Masonry's been around, right? So, first of all, we're, a society that keeps some secrets, and that's always sort of captured the imagination. And, ever since our earliest days, there's been, exposés and the Morgan affair was, of course, like one of the earliest Masonic conspiracy theories that, I would say is still probably around. It's still probably with us. And so I kind of wanted to explore that because it's weird. It's like there were in the 19th century, you could count the number of conspiracy theories on one hand, right? You had the Morgan affair, you had the Taxil hoax, and that was kind of it. I mean, I'm sure that there were things that were being circulated by the the Catholic Church about worshiping Baphomet and things things of that kind of nature, but for the most part, we haven't had the kind of explosion of conspiracy theories that we have today. And I was in New York a couple weeks ago, just on a family vacation, and we went down to Ground Zero at 9/11. I actually have a video clip which I'll actually when we edit this down for YouTube, I'll stick that in the beginning. But basically, that was a pretty large conspiracy theory that promulgated, and and what's funny is that it actually was a conspiracy, right? I mean, the plot to fly planes into the tower and to attack the Pentagon was a conspiracy. And so there's this, I think, problem in that conspiracy theories, they muddy the water, right? I think that's, and so I started to, as we started talking about the subject and starting to think about it, my thought is who really benefits from these conspiracy theories, right? And what's the purpose of them? And now I remember when I was a kid, I read this terrific book. It was actually a trilogy of books by Robert Anton Wilson called the Illuminatus trilogy. And that really brought the idea of the Illuminati as this sort of global conspiracy into the forefront of people's imaginations. I think prior to that, the Illuminati were almost unknown to most people, and that kind of hit a countercultural note. And I know that Wilson was part of a prankster collective. I think Ken Kesey was part of this. So Jeff Woolsey's Fenord. So there were a bunch of people. I know that the people who were part of the Discordian Church were part of this too, and they called it. And I'll probably have to bleep this out. He called it Operation Mindfuck, and what their goal was to basically prank people into believing that there was a conspiracy when there really wasn't. So they would send like government officials letterhead on Bavarian Illuminati stationery, and and it was all like in good fun. I mean, like if you ever so Don Novello, he was one of the producers of the original Saturday Night Live back in the 70s. People of a certain age would also remember him as Father Guido Sarducci, right? That was his character. But he also had several other ones. I think one of them was called Laszlo Toth, and Laszlo Toth would write these letters. He wrote hundreds and hundreds of letters to like Richard Nixon and to conservative politicians and to liberal politicians, and basically they were these really absurdist letters that these officials, thinking that he was a constituent, took him kind of seriously. So he then published those in a series of kind of hilarious books that came out in the 1980s. But that kind of like, I think, set the stage to the point now where the conspiracy theories are running rampant, to the point where even the president is, claiming that the reversal of the yield curve in the bond market is a conspiracy perpetrated by the media to make him look bad. And so, my question is how did we get here, and what damage does it do, if anything, and who benefits?
So I think whenever I hear conspiracy theories, I think of the powerful concept of in-groups and out-groups, right? So if your example of faking a conspiracy, of faking a letterhead and sending it to people trying to get that, to me, reinforces one aspect of this, which I think is people want to feel, people who are trying to put up a conspiracy want to feel like they're in an in-group, even if it's detrimental to other people. And number two, people want someone to blame for things that are going wrong. And so they want to feel like they're not in the in-group. They want to feel like they're almost powerless. There's nothing that they can do. And so they can't wrap their mind around, in the case of the economy, they can't wrap their mind around global economics and all of the different factors that go in. And so how can we explain this in 5 words or less? Masons are causing it. A political party is causing it. The media is causing it. And so I think there's this heuristic of wanting to simplify everything. And there's also this psychology of I'm either in the in-group or the out-group. And if things are going wrong for me, then I'm obviously in the out-group. There's an in-group that I'm not a part of, and they must be out to get me.
Right. And I think there's a lot to that, Adam. And that's a distinctly American idea. Or actually, I shouldn't say American, but Western culture. The Brits are really good at it too, which is they always root for the underdog until you're not the underdog anymore, and then they're just rooting for you to fail. And we do that a lot in this country. The underdog is king. Root for the underdog until he actually wins, and then let's kill him. Move on to the next.
Hey, I'm a Red Sox fan. I understand that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And a Patriots fan, by the way.
And a Patriots fan.
That's true.
Ew.
Yeah, it's terrible. I know. It's terrible.
Hazard of where I was born. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So, I think that stuff, I mean, you kind of can't get away from it, I mean, it is what it is, especially in the internet age. I mean, like, the first thing I remember, one of the first things I ever looked up online were Freemasons, and how much crazy stuff there was online about Freemasons in the early days of the internet, and like on crazy GeoCities sites, and so I don't think you're ever going to get rid of it. You know what I'm saying? I think it just is what it is, and the best way to really fight it is especially for people like us, is to be careful.
And it's spreading. I mean, it's not in a pamphlet that Thomas Paine writes anymore to try to get the word out there. It's on the internet, and it goes and it goes and it gets. Sorry, I should make sure my hand is in frame if I'm going to gesture. It spirals and it spirals, and more people get access to this information and can change it. Deep fakes, or just photoshopping images or photoshopping documents to kind of heighten the conspiracy theories is just, I think the ease of technology, the access to information doesn't help any of the psychological things that we as Westerners are prone to when it comes to conspiracy theories. It just makes it worse.
It's really funny, Adam, because like I think about it this way, is that like conspiracy theories used to be fun parlor games for smart people, right? Where we'd play this game of how deep can you get down this rabbit hole. Or insane people, literally actually insane people thought these things. But now it's different. We live in a troll culture, right? And online, they make these deep fakes and things like that. They're destabilizing.
What do you mean by troll culture? What does that mean?
I mean that as, people are doing it on purpose to destabilize. The big famous thing, the Russian trolls, that were set up to basically destabilize our last election, right? In a huge, vast way, an actual conspiracy. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because they're spinning conspiracy theories. They're conspiring to spin conspiracy theories. That's what I wanted to say. I mean, that's messed up. And that's true. That's an actual fact that actually happened. Mm-hmm. And so when things like that actually happen, that are insane like that, you have to say, well, what else could happen? So it's an Aurora Boreas. It's eating its own tail. Mm-hmm. At this point, So, I mean, it's to me, it's unstoppable. It's insane. And again, the only thing you can do is be careful these days.
Yeah. I do want to point out one other thing in that I think more people have access to information, and so more people are talking about conspiracy theories. But I also highly recommend, if you're interested in conspiracy theories, I listened to a very interesting. This should be your main podcast, of course, but I listened to another very interesting podcast the other day that talked about the U.S.'s history with Iran, and how at a certain point in the history, when we were trying to destabilize the government,
Yeah.
the U.S. government was paying for people to riot on both sides of the same issue. And so there were tons of rioters out in the streets, and they were all paid by the U.S. government. And so there's been rumors about this forever, but that information took 20 years to get out, and now it might take 20 seconds.
Yep. Yeah, totally.
So Mike Hambrecht is on the feed today, and he says, don't we have more to worry about from the organizations that believe these conspiracies, like white supremacy groups or KKK and so forth, than we do from the conspiracy theories being out there? What do you think of that?
Again, it's the Aurora Boreas. Which do you worry about first, right? The thing that inspires the crazy people, or the crazy people that inspire the crazy theories that inspire crazy people? I mean,
yeah, you can't. Conspiracy theories on their own only have so much effect. I think he's got a reasonable point where if conspiracy theories on their own only have so much of an effect, when people start to believe them and act on them, that's when it goes from parlor game to actual physical, emotional, mental threat.
Right.
And so I think that's a fair point. But I think more and more people, to complement that, more and more people are believing them before. And so more and more people are being told that it's okay to believe them. It's okay to act on them. It's okay. And that's just a product of the culture that's popped up in the recent history that I think has been more pervasive than it has been in the past.
Right.
So go ahead.
No, go ahead.
One of the questions that I had was, I feel like as Masons, we kind of benefit a little bit from those conspiracies, right? I mean, when people think that we're more powerful and more influential than we are, we kind of tend to be like, we just sort of have like a little, yeah, that's right. I'm off to run the world now. Like for years, people, when I would go to Masonic Week in February, people would be like, what do you do there? And I'm like, oh, we smoke a lot of cigars and drink scotch and plan our takeover of the world. And it's been a joke, but the truth is, I feel like when I look at it now, kind of in the light of recent events, I say to myself, are we really benefiting? I mean, is it not hurting us as a fraternity, as a movement, as an organization, that these conspiracy theories are out there and that we're not actively combating them?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We're our own worst enemy when it comes to that, right? I used to say that for years when I worked at the House of the Temple, and I would give tours to people, and they would be like, "Are you like a shadowy cabal?" And I'm like, "Well, so here's the thing: is that we'd love you to believe that, we want to be important like that, but we're not. The truth of the matter is that we're not. We're our own worst enemy in that, because even we like to think that we're that awesome, but we're not.
Right.
It's the plain truth of the matter is we're not, and that's hard. It's hard to admit. No, I know you think I'm awesome and powerful, but I'm not.
Yeah.
So let's talk. Let's talk. Let's start. We'll start big picture and kind of move ourselves down a little bit about how do we secure ourselves? How do we stay safe in today's day and age? And I'll start big, and Adam, jump in whenever you want.
Yeah.
But,
wait, before you do that though, there's something that I wanted to address about Mike's comment, and I would just say that I think that it's not more important to focus on the organizations that believe the conspiracies, because for every KKK that believes in a conspiracy like that, there are lots and lots of people who believe it but don't necessarily act on it. They don't necessarily do anything. But what it does is when you believe a conspiracy theory like that, it undermines the faith that you have in actual reality, in actual facts, in actual science, right? So for the people who believe that the 9/11 attack was an inside job. I mean, not only does that do a tremendous disservice to all the people who perished, all the first responders and stuff who perished, trying to deal with that, and just the victims, right? But it also undermines the faith in the people that we rely on, like people like the National Transportation Safety Board and stuff like that, to actually get to the bottom of stuff, right? What's the point of spending millions of dollars on an investigation of a plane crash if at the end of the day nobody's going to believe you and just go, yeah, I'm sure it was like shot down by our own military for some nefarious, black helicopter, blah blah blah. It's just, to me that's why that I think this is a truly dangerous thing, is because it's not the people who are necessarily acting on it. I mean, I think that's kind of a third order effect, right? But the second order effect is that the people who say nothing and believe it, right? That actually does damage to to the faith that we place in our institutions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's certainly two orders of magnitude of this. The first one is the facts are not facts anymore. Facts are what I believe. And that is starting to erode news, that is starting to erode what two people can see the same thing and have two different interpretations of that, and both of them can call that objective truth. And so that we can already see starting to erode. But I would actually argue that is causing harm to our society at large. Mm-hmm. But the individual or the group, the small group that act on that, I think honestly is a smaller but more pressing threat to us. Mm-hmm. Because that is individualized. That is, I need to think about when I'm interacting in the world, I need to be aware of my surroundings for my bodily safety, as opposed to I need to push back when I'm in conversations with somebody who I think is a nice person but has these crazy views, because I don't want them to all of a sudden stop trusting, the government. I think those are two different things. One, I think we can have a little bit more control on than the other. I think the individual that can act up, I think we might actually be able to have a little bit more control over being aware of that and protecting for that than we can as individuals when we're talking about societal good or society as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that Freemasonry has traditionally taken two approaches to this. The first approach is sort of characterized by, Masonry in continental Europe and elsewhere in the world, where you just don't see lodges. People don't display their square and compasses. They don't wear rings. They're very secretive about it. They don't talk about their membership. They don't reveal where they meet and things like that. And they operate kind of, I won't say underground, but they're certainly trying not to call attention to themselves. The other kind of thing that we've seen is what UGLE is doing now, where they're just kind of completely opening, what's the phrase? Opening the kimono, right? They're saying, look, we have nothing to hide. We're going to do open houses. We're going to, we'll tell you whatever you want to know. Whatever we can't tell you because we gave our word we won't, you can get on the internet. They're just not, they're not kind of allowing that to become a thing for them, because they've understood that there's very real consequences when people start to believe stuff that's not true.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's start with physical safety, right? We'll kind of start on Maslow's bottom of the pyramid and work our way up.
Right. That's exactly right. So let's talk about the big stuff, right? So the big stuff is like website. Okay. That's a big thing. And from a Grand Lodge perspective, what we've done is we've locked down a bunch of information. So here's a good example. We have in 2 weeks, we have a leadership conference that we're running here locally. and it's a big event. There'll probably be about 150 guys there. Here's my plug for the leadership conference. Sign up before you can't, because Wednesday's your last day to sign up. But that I run through Eventbrite, and I've had to put it behind a password wall. Not because I'm worried about non-Masons signing up and paying $130 for a conference with dinner, but because it's got where a whole bunch of Masons are going to be out in the open, at one time, and so that's the security risk right there. And so we've had to go to that. In the future, we'll probably keep doing that. We will keep certain information just to the group, and that'll probably be behind some sort of a password wall. And that's we don't publicize anymore where the Grand Master is showing up in public. Those are that's kind of big picture stuff. But that's one of the steps that we're taking.
By the way, I just want to point out, Diego Redondo has joined us. Diego is in addition to a brother in New York. He's also a friend of mine from back in childhood days.
Yeah.
But he also has a lot of experience in security. He worked at the federal level in law enforcement for many years, and now teaches collegiately. So, Diego, if you're there, if you've got comments, if you want to add something, please do, because
your comment is already appreciated, though. Please don't demonstrate the kimono opening, Eric.
I will not demonstrate the kimono opening. I'm not even wearing a kimono.
Yeah,
well,
that is a term that I did not hear until I started working in federal government, by the way. So I don't know how many people are opening their kimonos, but
that's terrific.
But what Jason's talking about is a concept that I'm sure some of our viewers know more about than me, but I mean, operational security, OPSEC, where, the Grand Master, you may not think that the Grand Master is the most important person in the world, but there might be somebody out there who thinks that Grand Master is the one talking to them in their brain, or that Grand Master is the one that made them lose $1,000 in the stock market yesterday, or that Grand Master is whatever. And so if you think outside of yourself, you have to try to look at the various breadcrumbs that we're leaving behind. It could be digitally, it could be in our conversations. And if somebody with malintentions puts that together, they could do harm. And so where can we kind of break that chain? Where can we kind of pull those breadcrumbs back? And in Jason's point, not publicizing where the Grand Master is, putting information behind a wall, behind a password wall. And the irony behind all that is that if somebody were to want to get that information and were to try to get it and they couldn't, they'd be blocked by a password that might actually exacerbate their thought that there's a conspiracy. So,
right.
Right.
But I mean,
and our buildings are marked.
Yeah.
Our buildings are marked. And frankly, I don't know how it is in every state, but at least in the District of Columbia, we don't actually own all of our buildings. Some of our buildings are rented by the lodges from commercial landlords or from different fraternal organizations.
Right.
And so when we start to look at security, for example, are there cameras? Does the door lock automatically, or does somebody have to lock it? We can mandate practices. We can say, hey, when you go into after dinner, when you go into the lodge room, you need to go downstairs, or you need to go to the front door, and you need to deadbolt it because the Tyler is outside the door, but that might be an 80-year-old person with a dull sword who doesn't know how to use it, right? But we can't. How do we interact with private landlords who we can't mandate? We can't just issue a grand lodge edict saying you need to have cameras in the lodge. Well, how do we deal if the landlord doesn't want to put in cameras? And so I know that's kind of starting to go a little afield, but it's looking at the things that we can and can't control. And I think the protection of information is one of those things that we can control, and I think is a good example.
Yeah. Diego just popped in and just said good access control at your lodge buildings, particularly the Grand Lodge, is important. And we definitely pay attention to that. And I'm fairly certain most other places do as well. You know, at the House of the Temple, when I first started working there, it was 2000. I started there in 2005. I think it was barely a year there. I think it was in 2006 that we had our first crazy person. And it was a guy who had just taken a whole lot of PCP, got himself on a tour, just sort of slinked off, and found his way all the way up into the interstitial space between the roofs, because between the temple room roof. Literally got himself to the highest part of the building that he possibly could, where it got really warm, and plus, PCP actually it drives your it makes you feel overheated anyway. So he strips off all his clothes and literally was like jammed into like this little tiny space, singing to himself, naked. And like we call the cops,
as one does.
right? Exactly.
Yeah.
So we called the cops. Now here's the thing, right? The cops didn't believe us. The cops were like, whatever. Literally, 911 was like, oh yeah, sure, we'll send a unit. Nothing came. We're 2 blocks from a substation, a large substation actually, and nobody came. It got to the point where finally we sent another intern out into the middle of 16th Street, one of the busiest thoroughfares in the city, and flagged a cop down. And then that cop went, oh yeah, that's an actual problem. And he radioed, and then all of a sudden, literally everybody descended on us. And luckily that guy wasn't violent. He just, wanted a nice spot to go and sing naked.
But here's the question though. After that incident, did anything change about the tour process?
We got security guards at the front, who are the only people who are allowed to open the doors. And they're not armed, but they're capable. They're certainly capable. And so now all of that is checked. We had another incident where we had a couple of guys with a video camera, and they just said, oh yeah, we just we want to walk through, and fine, who cares, you can take the tour with your stupid video camera. Well, it turned out that they were a guerrilla documentary team from a Breitbart associated website. And they were there to get us, to catch us in the act. And they grilled a poor, 19-year-old college intern who didn't even know anything about masonry, and just grilled the guy. And I mean, you could see his eyes on this video like, I don't know what I'm doing. Shut up, stop badgering me. And and they were like all triumphant, like, one for Jesus. And it was like, come on, And so after that, no more cameras on a tour, And so the terrible part is that it slowly erodes all of the good things, that we have.
But there's
we should have named the show "We Can't Have Nice Things."
Yeah, right. This is why we can't have nice things.
Right.
This is how we get in.
Yeah.
But there's an important process that I think we need to look at on the individual, frankly, on the Grand Lodge level, yes, but on the individual lodge level as well, about what events can we anticipate and what can we do to try to control for them before they happen. So for example, it's not outside of the realm of possibility when you're giving tours at a big public building that was featured in Dan Brown books that a conspiracy theorist could come in. And so, can we anticipate and can we preemptively write a policy about what if somebody comes in with a video camera? Can we, as a lodge, look around and say, preemptively write, okay, we know we have two points of entry, 2 points of exit. Does everybody know that? Does everybody, if somebody, honestly, it doesn't even have to be a conspiracy theory. And I'm sorry, I'm going to wax poetic about preparedness for a second and then get back on topic, Eric, I promise. But
sure.
Even, how, if somebody has a heart attack, do you know where the AED is? Do you know where the first aid kit is? Do you know where do you know who has a cell phone to call 911? Which I know is kind of moot because everybody has a cell phone now. But
if you have a cell phone, do you know the address where you are, because you're going to be asked that?
Yep. Are you looking into, is there somebody in the lodge or is there somebody in the Grand Lodge looking into these conspiracy theories to see if anybody's talking about, you know, oh no, I'm going to go get the guys at this lodge because they've wronged me. Or
Mm-hmm.
if you turn away a petitioner and they're disgruntled about that, um, what are the potential ramifications of that? We've had situations where we've turned away petitioners and
Mm-hmm.
they make threats. And I'm sure that's
Mm-hmm.
not unique to DC. I'm sure that's not unique to the lodges that I'm affiliated with.
Mm-hmm.
What are plans for that? What are procedures for this? How can we start thinking through this before it happens, because it is happening, and
Yeah.
not just be
Mm-hmm.
reactive?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we've had a couple of comments
Yeah.
from Jason and Patrick who've mentioned that their lodges allow concealed carry as long as you have a permit. Is that a solution? I mean, do we need to arm people in the lodge? I mean, maybe it's not the Tyler with a sword, but maybe the Tyler with a rifle. You know?
So I'm trying to be careful here because I have personal preferences, and then I respect all brothers and all opinions. We have in DC, we have very strict concealed carry laws that makes it virtually non-existent to conceal carry unless you're a law enforcement officer. And so we have a number of people who are either active or retired law enforcement officers in the district. And so there have been instances where they have carried in lodge, um, or in the
Yeah. In
building.
fact, in fact, actually, Adam, Georgetown Masonic Hall, in the changing room, they have those lockers up on the wall. Those
Hmm.
lockers are actually there for
Hmm.
weapons.
Hmm.
When Justice Columbia used to work there, or used to meet there, and then there were a whole bunch of law enforcement guys that were members of Potomac, and so they actually put those. They put those in. Justice Columbia, by the way, Justice Lodge was
Yeah.
founded by Hoover, and so it was
Yeah.
all LEOs from federal security guys. But
And
that's why those lockers are there.
And there's absolutely, and there was a comment from Jeff. A lot of police must be armed at all times if they're in your lodge.
Yeah,
That's absolutely true.
yeah,
But I want to make a distinction between a trained law enforcement officer who needs to carry at all times and is in that
yes,
profession, and someone who, and a member who reads these conspiracy theories and is giddy to get somebody who they think is coming to get us. Right? There needs to be a middle ground there.
Hmm.
And
yeah,
so while carrying in the building can be a solution, it needs to be implemented in the right way.
yeah, yeah. I totally agree with that, Adam. And I think that's that it's such a huge deal. I know a guy who used to work for the NRA, and he's told me several times about how he's actually had to use his concealed weapon, to get himself out of situations. And my question to him was always, right, but would you have been in that situation anyway if you didn't have the weapon? Like, you know what I'm saying? Did you
Mhm.
take more risk than you needed to, knowing that you had literally an ace up your sleeve? And yes and no, but for whatever reason, it seems like if you're carrying a gun, trouble finds you. That's my only thing.
Yeah. I mean, you know,
And that's a personal opinion.
call me the bleeding heart liberal of the bunch, but
Right.
guns make me very uncomfortable in lodges. I mean, I can tell you, like the synagogue that I go to, we have an armed guard in the building at all times,
Sure.
and they are trained LEOs,
Mhm.
and during high holidays and things like that, they'll park a police car out in front to as a deterrent and things like that, and
Mhm.
it's because it's a very real
Mhm.
thing,
Mhm.
and we take that very seriously. But I can tell you that there's something very disconcerting, when you're walking into a place and there's an armed guard there. It's just it puts a damper on things, and I'm not sure that and we've even seen it, like even in active shooter situations in schools where you did have an armed guard. He wasn't effective, right? Because it's to me, it's not about being armed. I think it's more about being aware and having procedures in place. So for example,
Mhm.
imagine for a second that the secretary had a little panic button under the desk that
Mhm.
he could hit just like if you were in a store and you a silent alarm goes off, it goes off at the police department. They send somebody, they send somebody over because it's been the alarm's been tripped. I'm not sure that having more guns in the building is necessarily going to make everybody safer.
My thing is that I'm fine with it as long as it's someone who's trained. And here's my analogy. Just because I can buy a wrench at Sears doesn't mean I don't need my mechanic, right? They're tools. And you need to know how to use those tools for those tools to be used effectively. And so it's just best to leave it to a professional who actually really knows how to use that tool. It's just kind of my viewpoint on things. But.
Yeah. But to Eric's point, it in the absence of concealed carry in lodge or in the building, because that varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction and state to state, and frankly, opinion to opinion.
Sure.
We need to be going back, and again, I'll keep getting on this horse. We need to be going back and looking at what are the plans in place? What are the known threats? How are we addressing those threats? How are we mitigating those threats? Or how are we preparing to respond to those threats, right? Because from a basic preparedness perspective, we can't rely on somebody. If your solution to somebody coming in and posing an offensive threat to the lodge is somebody in the lodge having a gun, that may or may not be true at the given time, right? But having contingency options or having other ways to address the situation, to pre-identify and address the situation, that is something that you'll have access to every time.
Yeah.
So I think it's almost like a concealed carry is one solution, but it's almost like a red herring, right? If that is an option, it needs to be part of any robust concept of what are we doing to identify and address the threats.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And the thing is like I think in a concealed carry situation, in order to have that measure of safety, either everybody has to be armed or nobody has to be. You know what I mean? Like you can have a guy who has a permit to carry, right? But that person needs to be in the room, and not just in the room, but able to get to a strategic position to defend the room without hitting brothers. You know what I mean? Like it's those kind of situations are even when you've got a lot of people armed, they're very dicey. It's very close quarters. It's bullets ricochet, things happen, people get hurt. Right. So, I'm just not sure. Like, and it's not, it's like, look, it's not a gun control thing for me. It's more of a, it's more of a, effectiveness. Like, are we really making the room safer by doing this or not?
It's fair. I think, and another thing is that we should harp on this, I guess, a little bit. Is be effective in the locks on the front door. It's like the best way to do it, right? I think about our lodges, and Adam's Lodge, Singleton, they own their building. And they do a really good job of keeping that building secure. They've got an effective front door lock. That's electronic. They can control their key fobs remotely. And so if someone loses their fob, they can kill it from a distance. There's a whole bunch of really cool things that they've got. They've got a camera on that front door so that when people come up to it, you can see it. Is it the end all to be all? No, but it's a really good start.
And frankly, a lot of those things were implemented post 2016 Milwaukee incident, where we took a step back and said, oh, hey, that button that's inside the door that you can use to unlock it, you can get to that through the mail slot using a cane, because we had a brother do that when they were locked out. Honestly, this big red button that's labeled door, anybody off the street can hit. So like, we took that as a learning opportunity, the threat to Masons in Milwaukee, to look at not only our physical security and change the camera system, change the lock system, but also, hey, we are going to assign somebody that their job before we go into lodge is to go downstairs and make sure that the door is closed. We are going to assign somebody that if we have guests that can't come into the lodge room when we open, they're going to sit outside with the guests so they're not left out there by themselves, right? They're not going to go in for the opening of lodge. And so there are plenty of opportunities for us to go back and look at not only our physical security that we may or may not have the money for, that we may or may not have control over, but also the procedures. What are we doing as a lodge to be effective with the tools that we do have?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so what's the best way for a lodge to kind of create that kind of plan? Is it best done at the Grand Lodge level? I mean, it seems to me that, in any given Grand Lodge, you're going to have a bunch of, law enforcement guys.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that that's necessarily, I mean, here's the thing. I think we, in figuring out what the plan is going to be,
mm-hmm.
right, that we have to create a balance between like locking everything down
mm-hmm.
and, leaving everything open,
mm-hmm.
right? We want it to feel open, but we want it to be secure, right?
So there are a lot of resources out there, and I want to just kind of highlight a few because they're free resources that anybody can have access to. First of all, ready.gov is a website that has tons of individual and community preparedness tools, resources, tips. It has a pamphlet on active shooters. What are you supposed to do? It's run, hide, fight, by the way. Just everybody should have that in their head. If you're in an active shooter situation, you run away. If you can't run away, you hide. And as a last resort, you fight. But ready.gov is a great resource. Also, emergency management as a profession is getting more and more robust and is addressing lots of threats. And so you have a local or a county or a state emergency management agency. And there's this whole push to look at not just preparedness of, federal state agencies, but of stakeholders. And as Masonic lodges, we are stakeholders in the community. We're members of the community. And so there are resources out there for businesses and for stakeholders, for people to come in and do both physical security checks and also send you templates and guides of how to create a plan, or how many members are there, what's the average age. Here's some bullets on the threats that we've seen from our state preparedness report, because every state has to put that together every year. Here are some state preparedness reports points, the threats that we're facing. And so you might want to consider that when you're developing your plans this year. There are tons of resources out there. So I'd start with ready.gov. I would start with contacting your local or your county or state emergency management agency, or your state or your local police department. I think those are all great resources that lodges can get free of charge.
Okay. All right. So let's move up the pyramid a little bit. Right. So
and Diego said, by the way, that local police departments will often do those assessments as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
So you can call that.
Mm-hmm.
And is that planning best done at the Grand Lodge level, at the Temple Association level, at the lodge level?
So I think the Grand Lodge the Grand Lodge's best role in the vast majority of circumstances is to set best practice and give guidance. The best implementation is on the lodge level or the Temple Association level, if multiple lodges meet in the building. Because the Grand Lodge doesn't necessarily know the nuances of every lodge, of every building, of everything that the Temple Association or the individual lodge may. However, the Grand Lodge might have more financial or time resources. And so every Grand Lodge, it might be a good idea for Grand Lodges to kind of spearhead an effort and create best practices and templates and checklists for individual lodges that are then executed at the lower level.
Mm-hmm. Or at least develop requirements for temple associations that they actually go through the exercise, once every 4 years or, something like that, at some sort of an interval, so that they're almost certified that their building has been certified safe, that their members, have some level of preparedness. Mm-hmm. I totally agree with Adam right there. And I think that you can't, the Grand Lodge can't do this themselves because of, we're talking about other buildings. And the Grand Lodge itself they're not going to be the ones that implement the plans that they make. So it's best done with those guys, I think, too. But I think that Grand Lodges can help by being really supportive, whether that's financial or more likely, I hate to say legislative, but by setting guidelines and holding guys accountable and temple associations accountable for the safety of their members.
Yeah, and Diego brought up a really, really good point about those plans are great to have and great to develop, but if you don't practice them, if nobody knows about them, then they're not effective. Maybe you write a plan that you think is so great, but you practice it, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, darn, we forgot about this part. Or, hey, we said we're going to do this, but we can't actually do that, right? The exercising is the opportunity to practice those plans in a safe environment so that you can figure out where the bugs are. So if and when you ever need to use that, you got most of the kinks worked out already, and everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing.
So I wanted to kind of elevate this a little bit above the a little bit up on the pyramid. There was a recent article that talked about the FBI. It said the FBI for the first time has identified fringe conspiracy theories as a domestic terrorist threat. This is being reported by Yahoo News. They believe, the document says that the FBI believes conspiracy theory-driven extremists are likely to increase during the 2020 presidential election cycle. And it said another factor driving the intensity of the threat is the uncovering of real conspiracies or cover-ups involving illegal, harmful, or unconstitutional activities by government officials or leading political figures. So as events, as things are unfolding, right, as more information is coming to light, in the, to impeach or not to impeach saga, as things are, and like we just had this thing with Jeffrey Epstein, right? So here's this guy who's very well connected on both sides of the political spectrum. He is indicted on sex trafficking. There's potential embarrassment. Some documents are dropped that sort of implicate other people might have been involved. And then while he's in prison, he commits suicide.
He kills himself. Yeah.
Kills himself, and of course the first thing that hit my Facebook feed was people were like, oh yeah, sure he killed himself, right? Or thanks Obama, or Hillary. It's like it was like instantaneous, right? Like we didn't even have to wait very long, and what's interesting too is that like you can see this, like you can almost see the Russian troll farms wringing their hands in delight. Here's another opportunity, and so to further into the article, they say the FBI acknowledges conspiracy theory-driven violence is not new, but it's gotten worse with advances in technology combined with an increasingly partisan political landscape in the lead up to the 2020 presidential election. Quote, the advent of the internet and social media has enabled promoters of conspiracy theories to produce and share greater volumes of material via online platforms that larger audiences of consumers can quickly and easily access. So I guess my first question for you guys is, do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah. In a word, duh. Yeah. And I apologize. And someone, I didn't catch who the name on this. I think it was Charles Ward. Anyhow, Charles said a little bit below in the comments, unfortunately, and this is what I very much agree with, it's not a matter of if, it's when. When will this touch us? And yeah, I definitely agree with that article and what it's saying, and I agree with the FBI's assessment of the situation. And we've known this for years. I remember sitting in and having discussions with the Grand Commander after we got a security guard at the House of the Temple, and him saying, someone's going to do it. Know how to get out of your office, and like it's a really, really sad commentary, but it's true. And so, these are all reality checks for us. We need to be prepared. It's not just Adam is a raving lunatic and saying, be prepared, think about these things. It's very real. You need to have these plans. You need to know what's going on. So in an emergency, you can minimize your thinking and maximize your doing.
Okay, but that's the tactical end of it, right?
Sure.
Right. I'm talking more about the strategic end of it.
Yeah. So that same article, I believe it was that same article that defined people. What am I trying to say? That same article said that they use conspiracies as an attempt to explain events or circumstances as the result of a group of actors working in secret to benefit themselves at the expense of others. So I want to reiterate that last point: working in secret to benefit themselves at the expense of others.
Right.
And so we are out there with our squaring compasses, with our buildings, especially in the United States, known to be working together behind a closed door with the suspicion that we're doing to benefit ourselves. And so from a strategic perspective, I would have to say that not only do I agree with this assessment, and I think we fall squarely into an organization that is likely a target of conspiracy theorists, of violence from conspiracy theories, based on this definition from the FBI and this study from the FBI.
Yeah.
Now here's where it gets really sticky, right? Because the people who are, I mean, let's call it what it is. It's disinformation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so people who are making these, funny Hillary memes and throwing them out there, right? Are that itself is a conspiracy, right? It's designed to do exactly what you quoted, Adam, which is working in secret. How did you describe it? Working in secret to benefit?
It is attempt to explain events or circumstances as the result of a group of actors working in secret to benefit themselves at the expense of others. Benefit themselves at the expense of others.
So people who spread these conspiracy theories, people who create these memes, are doing exactly that.
You're right.
Right? So it's a conspiracy wrapped in a conspiracy. You know what I mean? Like it's an enigma wrapped in a riddle, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So on the one hand, there is a real conspiracy, and on the other hand, the conspiracy is that they're dealing in conspiracies, right?
Right. False conspiracies.
Right. So we then pay attention to the false ones, but we don't really pay attention to the real ones.
The other thing that article really brought up too is that this is a result of an advance in technology. And so Diego posted, and he's 100% right here, is that the internet has enabled a lot of aberrant behavior. The people who used to hide in their houses wearing tinfoil hats can feel normalized and validated by others that they meet online, thus empowered.
Yeah,
and he's 100% right. You look at some of the chat rooms that recent shooters have been in and active on, and you start to see a pattern. They feel validated because they've found other people who are just as crazy as hell as they are, and all of a sudden they feel supported, and they have an idea of, well, I know what I'm going to do. That's
and I want to push. Good. And I want to push back a little bit, Eric, on what you said about real conspiracies versus, fake conspiracies and not real conspiracies, because every conspiracy is real to someone, right? And so if we're getting the internet, to Diego's point and to Jason's point, the internet is creating a place where you can find a community where whatever conspiracy you believe in is validated as real based on some evidence, right? Because there are a group of people and you're yelling into an echo chamber that's repeating the same thing back to you, where you believe that conspiracy is real. And so us defining it as real or not real, I think we as three, hopefully, objective, sane individuals can identify conspiracies that are actually going on versus conspiracies that are completely made up. But I think that does a disservice to the realness that some people feel about some of these conspiracies, and how much that emphasizes the threat of potential harm or the threat of potential action based on that conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Okay. Except that I would just say that the when I think about here's the thing. When I was a kid, there was a group of people called the LaRouches, right? So this is a sort of
Lyndon
an
LaRouche.
extreme, Lyndon LaRouche, right? The
Yeah.
LaRouches, they were sort of an extreme branch of the Democratic Party.
Weren't they like radical libertarians?
Kind of. I mean, really, they were just. I mean, their ideas were just completely bizarre, and they used to stand out on the street corners on Michigan Avenue and pass out flyers and hold signs and things like that. And I remember at the time, I mean, even as a high school student, right, you were able to look at that and just be like, these guys are crazy, right? And
Oh yeah.
and they never really had any sort of impact, right? And of course, this is pre-internet days. But now, because of the increased media attention, right, and the speed at which these things go out, these conspiracies become more viable. So in the article, one of the, they talked to this guy, Joe Usinski, he's a professor of political science at University of Miami, and he does a lot of work on conspiracy theories. He says it's not that people are becoming more conspiratorial, but conspiracies are getting more media attention, right? And because of that, I guess for me, what it is like so after the Jeffrey Epstein thing happened, right? Somebody had posted some kind of meme about the Clintons being behind it, right? Absolutely crazy. And I called them out on it, and I said, you're helping the Russians. They're doing this to destabilize, because what's going to happen is what they want, the people who are actively trying to manipulate the election, what they want is they want you to not trust anything. They're going to muddy the water. So they're going to make that water so muddy that there's going to be no clarity and no ability to tell what's real from what's not real. And so what I said to this guy, who was a brother, I said, this isn't, you shouldn't be spreading this stuff. And he said, well, I just thought it was funny. Right? I don't really believe it. I just thought it was funny. And I thought to myself, well, that's funny until the wrong person reads it. And it's not funny to them, right? They believe it. And now they're going to go forth and possibly act in some way, either at the ballot box, either, in public by spreading, disinformation, or worse, by deciding that, there was an article that talked about this guy who was going to shoot up the Springfield, the rotunda at the Capitol in Springfield, Illinois, to call attention to the Pizzagate basement, thing, right? So someone, I mean, that was a plan that was thankfully thwarted, but
Well, so here's
it
another
could have
one.
not
All right.
been.
Okay, so here's another one. So there's a place in Northern California, just south of San Francisco, called the Bohemian Grove, and it's a private club. It's actually it was a club that was founded by a bunch of artists who lived out on the West Coast, as sort of an artistic, like a wilderness retreat. And Bohemian Grove would invite wealthy members of the community, especially in San Francisco, to come join their club of Bohemian Grove. And the reason they did that is because they were artists. They were dirty poor, and they needed patrons. Patrons are rich people who want to give artists money to keep them going.
Sounds a lot like a bunch of operative Masons in the
I was going to say, yeah,
18th
sounds
century.
familiar.
It is also one of the oldest practices of humanity. And so So Bohemian Grove, I think beginning almost right after they were founded in the 20s, would hold a big retreat. It was almost like a bacchanal. And this private retreat was for the donors and the artists who lived and worked in the community to get together at Bohemian Grove, have a huge bonfire, and basically just get drunk as hell together and have a good time. Well, conspiracy theories started to pop up that this was some sort of a satanic thing. Because one of the things that they did is that they burned a huge wooden owl that they made, and the owl is the symbol of the Bohemian Grove, and they would burn this owl to kick off the weekend. And that got all sorts of conspiracy theories. Well, it devolved to the point where the conspiracy theory is that they sacrifice babies and that this is actually a satanic event that all of these people get together for. And that wound its way into one guy's head. And he, fortunately, was caught sneaking around in the woods around the club, armed to the teeth with explosives, semi-automatic weapons, and tons of ammunition, because he was going to stop the baby sacrifices. And thank God it was a security guard just stumbled on him. And then the next year, and all the years after, they don't just have security guards. They have loaded that forest with security people. And some stupid show on Discovery Channel literally sent their crack investigative team into that grove to go and see, let's see what's up, what's really happening. Mm-hmm. Well, you morons, you went into that grove at night, into that forest at night, while all of those guards are really on edge because they had just busted a guy armed to the teeth who was going to kill everybody, for the sake of the dying babies. And so here comes the television crew. It did not go well for the television crew. And so this stuff is starting to get really serious.
And just for point of context, when they burn the owl, right? The owl represents the cares and worries of the outside world. Correct. And so by burning them, they're symbolically saying we're just going to have a good time, right? There's absolutely no ideology behind it. It's just a symbolic, artistic performance art thing, just to say we're going to burn our worries.
It is literally the private version of Burning Man.
I was just going to say, it sounds a lot like Burning Man, where a bunch of artists and independents get together and they just burn it at the end instead of the beginning instead of the end.
Correct.
Yeah,
it's exactly right.
Yeah.
So I guess for me, like what I would say to Masons out there is that because we are an organization that who one of our central tenets is truth, right? You have an obligation to not spread this stuff.
Yeah.
It might come into your feed and you might find it amusing and funny because you know better, but don't spread it. Just have a giggle and hide it or move on, or it's just it drives me crazy to see people trafficking in this kind of stuff, because it's like it's hurting us. It's hurting us as an organization. It's hurting us as a movement. Right. And it's hurting the country. It's hurting, it's hurting our institutions, and it's getting people, like if we're complaining as Masons, like, why don't people want to join organizations like this anymore? Well, that kind of stuff isn't helping.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And I'll get back on my preparedness horse for 2 seconds and say, I 100% agree with you that we should be trying to reinforce truth and not sharing things that we know not to be true, and reinforcing these norms and allowing these conspiracy theories to echo. But at the same time, we should remain aware that these conspiracy theories are out there. And we, as Masons who want knowledge and who want information and who want insight, should be aware of what's going on and should be figuring out what we're going to do if and when we ever get confronted with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of a two-pronged approach. To your point, Eric, don't spread them, but be the one to go back to your lodge and say, hey, if somebody comes in here doing wanting to do bad, what are we going to do? Or hey, who's going to go lock the door before we go into lodge? So it's kind of, we as Masons can do multiple things. We can be doing both of those, and I think we should be doing both of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, and I am 100% on the preparedness bandwagon, right? As the French like to say, a warned man is worth two, right?
Yeah.
But I think too, we need, as a society, we need to get back to a place where, look, you're never gonna get rid of the LaRouches and the KKK and stuff like that. But what you can do is you can marginalize that to the point where, again, people just go, I don't, this just sounds crazy to me. This sounds, like complete and utter horse crap, and so it's like when you're finally, when we're finally at that point, because we can do that, because we know the difference between what's real and what's not real, right? Then these conspiracy theories have less effect, right? Because they're not gonna garner the same kind of attention, right? So when somebody says, you know what, I'm gonna strap a bunch of weapons to myself and go, perform a terrorist act to call attention to this conspiracy that's happening, or I'm going to go get back at the Masons or the Jews or the immigrants or the Mexican, insert your favorite out group. Yeah. Your favorite scapegoat here. That becomes less attractive because those people know that nobody's going to pay attention to it. Nobody's going to believe it. They're not going to talk about it. They're not going to traffic in it. Right. And it kind of defuses it. Right. So I think it's a two-end approach, right? But see, I think the mistake is that if we ignore the input end of it, right. And just say, well, we just have to, well, at a certain point, at what point do you lose what you have, right? At what point do we have to become so locked down and so conscious of stuff that we're creating an unwelcome environment, or we're creating an environment where, if you're a stranger equals danger. And that's not where we want to be. I think as an organization, I think we want to welcome people to the lodge and hopefully, find good Masons, within those people who visit us and who seek us out, right? They, so knock and it will be open to you. Well, yeah, maybe, or, maybe in 10 years, if this doesn't change, maybe not, maybe it won't be open to you. Right. And that would be very, very sad for all of us.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
Well said. We can't go so far down the lockdown that we all go into, prepper mode out in the middle of a cabin in the woods. No, we need new lifeblood. We need new people. Well said.
Right.
Beans again for dinner? Yeah. Cool. Well, so we're going to put links to those resources, Adam, that you mentioned in the show notes. And there are a couple of people who've noticed that the show has not been showing up in the feeds, and that's because our feed was broken. It's been repaired today, so you should see a whole bunch of episodes starting to show up over the week. We have to space them out. We can't upload them all at once because our hosting provider gets kind of salty about huge uploads and lots and lots of bandwidth. So we'll be re-uploading them this week. Is there anything else, Adam, you want to add to the preparedness bandwagon?
I don't let the bystander effect get to you. Don't think that somebody else in your lodge is going to be the one to come and make the preparedness plans, talk to people about what to do in the case of emergency. Be the person, be the light in the lodge that brings it to the lodge, because if you don't, nobody else is going to do it. Stay aware, but not to the point where you feel paralyzed when you're out in society, or where you don't let new people into the lodge, to your point before, Eric. And I think as long as we stay aware, and we are always thinking about the what if and planning for the what if, we're going to be far better off, even with the conspiracy theories and or the threats that are out there.
Cool.
That's what I got.
Excellent.
Terrific.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Adam. This is also
thanks, Adam.
This is also the point of the show where we thank our executive producers for making the show happen. Without you, this show does not happen. And so a huge thank you to all of our executive producers. And if you'd like to become an executive producer, you can visit our Patreon page. It's patreon.com/X-Oriente. Every bit helps. We use the money that we make. This is a labor of love for all of us. We're not here to make money. We don't take advertising dollars yet. What we do with it is we pay for the bandwidth. In fact, we're now in active development with our Android app, and it's for some reason they're saying that we have to have 5 episodes under our belt before they'll list it.
Too bad.
Which is weird because we're now on episode 129. So
yeah, we'll keep working.
Yeah,
we'll get to that 5 soon.
I'm investigating that, but as soon as that hurdle is cleared, that the app should appear in the Google Play Store pretty forthwith. And of course, you can get us on Spotify, on iTunes, on Apple Music or Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find X-Oriente. Again, thanks for everybody who showed up. Special thank you to Diego Redondo, who is Diego. We're gonna have to have you on the show to talk more about stuff. He's a super interesting cat, and that's all I got.
Yeah, thanks,
Anything
Adam,
else?
and thanks everybody else. That's all I got.
Cool.
It was terrific having you.
All right, so we'll be back. I think next week with another episode, and thanks for joining us. Fiat Vox, everybody. Bye.